don't say.
Good evening and welcome to another episode of the Hey Joe Show, brought to you tonight by the Hey Joe Show. Well, we want to thank you tonight for joining in with us, and if some of you may have seen the most recent post on Facebook, you noticed that the advertisement was very homemade, I guess we could say, and I have to give a shout out to our 11-year-old son Camden for that, because he made that on his own. And it's funny because Kyle Publications is a family business, and Camden is going to be joining in on that. Obviously, you know that Colton is the producer of the show, basically. He's the technology guy, and Camden's going to be picking up with that. So we're excited, and I had to share that, so I got to give a shout-out to Camden. It is good to be with you tonight. We always want to thank everybody at thelightnetwork.tv. Want to invite you to check out the family of podcasts there, and also check out truth.fm. We believe that you're going to find an interesting and a useful tool there for you individually, but also for your congregation. Now, tonight, you'll notice, those of you who are watching this live on Facebook, you'll notice that Miss Hey Joe is not with me this evening. She did make it back from her trip. Last week, you'll recall that I was on my own, and I did an episode that I called Straight from the Heart, and I talked about don't leave your flank unprotected. Don't forget about the flank. Well, tonight we were going to go live with the show, but we decided to try something a little different. Sometimes it is good to change it up, and so what we're going to do is this. You know, the Hey Joe Show has been running, I guess, since about 2008 or 2009. And it's interesting to see how the show has evolved in the set, in the technology, in how we do. We'd like to think that we do things a little bit better now than we did in the past. Although sometimes the old episodes are just, you look at it and be like, that's just so simple. Sometimes getting away from simple is not always great, but we do love looking back from time to time and seeing how the show has kind of come about. And so what we decided to do this evening, as we kind of pause in our theme this year of pursuit, we're going to get back to that. Next week, we'll get back to that, and there's a lot that we're going to study from the standpoint of what we're not supposed to pursue as well as what we are to pursue. And, of course, we have the Wheel of Fortunate. We're going to bring that back, and next week we made this a season of giving free giveaways with the Hey Joe Show. And so we want to encourage you to make sure you understand that that is still a part of the show. But tonight we wanted to do something kind of neat, kind of special, and that is comb back through the files of an old episode of the Hey Joe Show. Old in the sense of what the studio looked like, old in the sense that I'm not sure I had the same amount of gray in my beard that I do now, although I did have a beard and I was still cool. But it's from November 2016. And you think about what was going on in November 2016. Well, there was a lot that had just taken place, and an interesting political climate, and coming to a close of a year as it pertained to young people and, kind of what parents were up against, what teenagers were up against. But what's interesting is, in looking back over that, a lot of what we saw then is still very relevant to today. And so what we decided to do was to kind of, in this kind of press pause on our theme, to comb back through those files and invite you tonight to watch and enjoy an older episode of the Hey Joe Show. You're going to notice that Aaron still looks the same. Still beautiful, still young, still have all the humor, but I obviously have changed a little bit. So anyhow, we want to invite you to enjoy this episode of the Hey Joe Show from November 2016.
Due to poor connection. And we're live.
Hi. Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Hey Joe Show. My name is Joe, and I'm happy to be joining you tonight from Spring Hill, Tennessee. Obviously, you see Miss Hey Joe over there getting her headphones on. One of the things we said when it came time for this video was we wanted to be ready when we went live, instead of having you just look at me and look at Aaron and kind of get our stuff together. So, anyhow, we want to thank you for tuning in with us and welcome you to the Hey Joe Show. Aaron and I have actually been away from each other all weekend.
We have. It's good to see you tonight,
It's good
Joe.
to see you too. Good to be reacquainted with you. I've actually been away on a young professional retreat with our home congregation to the beautiful mountains of Gatlinburg, Tennessee. And I will tell you this, I didn't get to see much of the mountains because of the many wildfires that are blazing in eastern Tennessee and in Kentucky and North Carolina.
This is the first I've heard of this. You did not tell me that there were blazing fires while you were there.
There are blazing fires, and we didn't get a chance to really see much because of the haze. Anyhow, had a wonderful opportunity, though, to spend time with fellow Christians in the mountains and to get away. And we talked about the subject of change and what that change when we are converted and become Christ followers, that there's supposed to be a change within us and a change that can be seen exterior on the exterior as well. And so it really was a good weekend. But tonight, Aaron and I obviously have had a long weekend, and so that being the case, the show for this weekend is not going to be super long, but we want it to be so we say, yeah, but we want it to be impactful. And so as we look at what we're doing tonight, obviously we want to always start off with in the same way that we do, by welcoming you to the Hey Joe Show, but also by thanking those folks at the lightnetwork.tv who allow the Hey Joe Show to be part of their platform. And if you have not visited thelightnetwork.tv, we want to encourage you to do so, invite you to do so, because there are many different podcasts that are there by members of the church that are intended to encourage you, to build you up, and then also to educate you. And I know that you'll appreciate the other podcasts that are there. Also want to encourage you, if you haven't already done so, to go on to iTunes and to to subscribe to the iTunes podcast, and then rate it once you do so, because that will help us in our rankings and try to get us maybe into the lives of people that we otherwise might not be able to get into their lives via the podcast world. So anyhow, it's good to be with you tonight. And for tonight's lesson, you can tell I have not slept in a long time on this retreat.
This is going to be a fun show. I'm kind of interested.
It's going to be a very fun show.
I'm kind of interested to see how this goes,
yeah,
Joe.
I am too, because I really don't know what's going to come out of my mouth. Just keeping it real, then that's what we do. But I will tell you this, as I reflect for this show, obviously we're recording this, just so you know, on Facebook. You guys will get it live. But obviously on iTunes, you'll need to know kind of when this is coming out so it makes sense. But this is the first podcast post-presidential election. And last week we dealt with the election as it pertained to relationships, in particular within your home. But this week, as a result of that, I'm not here to talk tonight about the outcome of the presidential election. I don't think any more needs to be said about that. I mean, after all, everybody's got an opinion about that. And if you don't think everybody has an opinion, just turn your news on and see all the people that are burning cars and breaking windows. And I'm sure you can find out their opinions online. But I will tell you this.
That's just your opinion.
And that's just my opinion. But I will tell you this. There was more to this election than just the president. And there was more to this election than even just your House of Representatives or your state Senate or the Congress or things along those lines. Many different states actually had on their ballot some shape or some legalization concept when it came to the issue of marijuana. And obviously, I want this podcast tonight to be real, but I also want it to be practical. And so I find it quite interesting that you and I are raising children today. And Aaron, we can talk about this from the standpoint of our own children, because just quite frankly, our kids, being that we do homeschool, it will change some of their exposure, but not all of their exposure to what's going on in culture. Because we do have them involved with different activities. We have them involved with baseball. We have them involved even with a youth group concept with the church. And so they are a part of other kids' lives. Community programs, things along those lines. But I will say this, the form of schooling that we choose to do also does add some type of delay to what they are exposed to on such a heavy level. So that being said, I do realize this, though, that the culture we're raising our children in, and the culture that you're raising your children in, is not the culture that you and I grew up with. Even if you're in the Generation X, if you're a part of that generation, which is what I'm a part of, our society was a little different. I grew up in the day and age where Nancy Reagan had put out her Just Say No concept, Just Say No campaign when it came to drug use. But see, we have today, and I just looked this up after this election, we have 24 states, including the District of Columbia. Now, mind you, there are only 50 states, correct? I mean, last I checked, I have to count up, Puerto Rico, and I have to count up other areas
history,
and
math.
things like that.
Oh.
But the idea of the 50 states, right? There are 24 of them. I want to just kind of lay that out there. 24.
24.
That have some form of a legalization of marijuana. And you and I, first of all, we need to say this, because there are going to be some individuals that may look at that and say, yeah, but Joe, aren't a majority of them medical marijuana? And, is there something to that? And should we flush that out? Well, I happen to tell you this. I'm not an herbologist, nor am I a chemist. And so for me to tell you any of those studies and any of those conclusions is far outside of the scope of this particular podcast. That's not who I am. And so I'm not going to comment on that. But I just want you to stop and think for a moment that out of the 50 states, almost half, in some way, shape, or form, have legalized marijuana. And what we have is, we have some states now that are pushing not towards just this concept of a medical marijuana idea, but for a recreational concept, and some states have already okayed that. And there's all kinds of issues that we can go into. The state of Colorado would be a wonderful case study to see what does legalization of recreational use of marijuana do to a society. There are studies that are out there that can be looked at, that you can see they're researched and things along those lines. But I will tell you this, even tonight, this particular podcast, and I want to invite you, if you're following along on Facebook or you're tuning in, I want to invite you to give us your feedback, send us your questions, your statements.
I am right here and waiting for your feedback to share and impart with others.
That's right. And so you feel free to chime in, but obviously, I don't want this just to be about marijuana. As I flip through the headlines in this particular issue of the U.S. News, I find that this idea of a headline that came out the end of October, and it's trying to help parents to determine whether or not their child is addicted to marijuana. Now, I happen to disagree with this article, because this article talks about the idea of your child using marijuana, and that doesn't mean that your child has a problem necessarily. And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to go into ways you can determine whether or not your child has a problem with marijuana, and things that come about in the sense of, is it causing financial problems, physical problems, emotional problems? Have they exemplified a decrease in responsibilities? What about a personality change? Have they become more isolated, depressed, quick to anger, heightened to anxiety? And it's more so trying to tell parents how to recognize whether or not their children have a problem with marijuana. You see, I start by default that according to the laws of the land, in the majority of acts of Satan, that those can be very dangerous. And you need to not purpose to dull yourself. And of course, somebody's going to fire back, and I get it. Sometimes statements are made in generalities, and then you get down to specifics, and they say, well, wait a second, what about this? Somebody might say, Well, what about cough syrup? What about medicines that your doctor prescribes to you because you've had a broken arm or you have had a surgery, and they tell you to take medicine to dull your senses? And in that case, Joe, are you saying that we shouldn't take those too? No, I'm saying if you need to dull the pain from that, folks, sometimes you need to. I've had some tooth problems before that, as tough as I'd like to think that I am, that turned me into a big baby real quick.
And I'm a witness, it did, but
I mean, it's not fun.
no.
And so I get it. Sometimes the pain, and you need that kind of medicine to dull the pain, but that's not what we're talking about.
Right.
We're talking about individuals who go through life wanting to dull their senses, wanting to live in this state of a high as a way of having fun. And what we see is oftentimes immoral behavior in our culture today oftentimes follows recreational drug use, recreational alcohol consumption. What happens is people tend to quote unquote loosen up. And in loosening up, Satan is a part of this picture. And he knows when you're open and when you're vulnerable. He knows when I'm open and vulnerable. And what we're getting at is a spiritual concept. Right. And that is this: we don't want to give Satan more of an open door into our lives than he already has. Now, as adults, we talk about this, but I want to talk to the teens, because you got to understand, Satan does not take a break just because you want to take a break yourself. He's like that defense, that attacking, blitzing defense, that when you go up to the line in the game of football and you think, oh, hopefully they'll just play zone. Hopefully they won't come after us. Well, Satan is that always blitzing, always coming after you defense. And there is no play off. There is no rest where he's going to say, oh, okay, you didn't want me to attack you. Okay, then since you didn't want me to attack you, then I'm not going to attack you. It's not the way he works. And so what we see is he's going to attack us when we're open. When we're vulnerable is when he's going to have the biggest impact. You look like you have a comment.
I do. I'm so excited we have a comment. I love comments. This is like my time here. It says, do you think things like marijuana and other mind-altering substances are a product of desensitization? Wait, did I say that word?
Desensitization.
That was a mouthful.
I think what's going on in our culture, and this is my personal opinion, our culture has argued in the history. Now, here's the way the argument works, and it just does. Our nation, at one point in time, we outlawed the use of alcohol, and we did so thinking, and from a standpoint, obviously I agree with it, but the idea was that this is not good for our society. It alters people, it changes people. We have more violence, we have more issues within families, and so there was an outlaw of alcoholism. Well, then all of a sudden it came along, and that once where it was not allowed, it became allowed. And so the argument is not so much from a desensitization, and it's not even an argument that started with this generation or started with this group of politicians. It is a discussion that our country has dealt with for years. For years. And when you think about the medicines that were used in the past, and you think about abuse of those medicines, and there weren't, laws restricting, and then all of a sudden there became laws restricting, and there was a rebellion against the laws that would restrict. And I'm even thinking not even just alcohol, but you go back during the time period of what was that drug in the I say the Wild West. It wasn't. It started with an O. It's Is it
the one that's found in poppy seed?
Yes.
Opium.
What is it? Opium. Opium abuse. How did you know that?
Because I love poppy seed muffins.
So you take opium?
And I was always told, don't eat a poppy seed muffin before you go try it for a job, because if they do drug testing, you're going to fail.
Really?
That's what I've been told.
I'm glad to know that. I'm glad Jonathan Saperlo might need to know that.
Okay, listen. And also someone made a comment about, they say Wikipedia says the slogan, what was the
Just
slogan?
say no.
Just say no. There you go. See, I forgot it. The slogan was created and championed by First Lady Nancy Reagan during her husband's presidency.
Boom!
See, you taught me something, and I taught you something.
Yes, you did. You taught me about drugs. And I thought
Yeah,
you'd just say no to drugs.
That's the only thing I know.
I think that's the major point for tonight's show, folks. The Miss Hey Joe knows more about drugs than
That's
than
all I
Joe.
know. That's all I know.
I think that's
all
pretty
I know.
interesting. Okay, anyhow,
Poppy seed muffin.
the idea is this. The question was
Okay.
the desensitization of America. Well, if you're going to really do a cultural study on this and come to a cultural conclusion, then you got to go beyond just the issue of marijuana. And you got to go to the overall concept of the American culture. And there's always going to be an element within America, because there always has been. That's why I say that if history is any indicator of what we do, there's going to be individuals that want the opportunity, and they're going to press for the opportunity for substances that will alter the mind and will change behaviors. That has happened in the past with, what'd you call them? Poppy seeds? Opium. And with alcohol.
I think that's right.
You even think about the idea of cigarettes, and our culture has changed some, at least in the concepts of, well, we need to warn people of the damaging effects of cigarettes, right? And to hopefully to get them away from that. So to answer your question, is it a concept of desensitization? I think it's just a continual American culture thing, that Americans seek for that next high. We seek for that release, at least some in America. And here's where I really think this is coming from. You ready for this? You see, there was a time period in our culture where mind-altering substances seemed to be pushed in a very culturally favorable way. It was the same period where individuals believed that burning women's undergarments was a good thing, where if it was standing up to the authorities, it was a good thing. And if Uncle Sam wanted you to go to Vietnam and you were to rebel against that, then it was a good thing. It was a time period to question everything in America that came from any authority figure. And as a matter of fact, if your parents wanted it, then you needed to want something different. Does anybody know what time period in America I'm talking about? There was also this little musical event that was called Woodstock that came along with that. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Yes, it's called what you and I, the younger generation, might call the hippie movement. Those who are older might call it the free love movement. Now, here's what came out of that. In that time period, you had a lot of young college folks that were getting wrapped up in that. And that was back, what, in the 70s? I'd have to go back and double check that. The
60s,
dates.
70s, you know.
But what happened to the 60s and 70s young people who were in college at that time? Where did they go today? You know where they went? They went into places of authority, which is a little ironic considering they used to say, question all authority. But it's not ironic because now they're advocating for this postmodern concept that we find ourselves in. That is, you go do what you want to do and I'll do what I want to do, but don't tell me that. And as a matter of fact, if you ever tell me you actually know something, then it's got to be wrong because that's just your opinion, and we don't live in a day and age of absolutes. And so that's where...
Except that everybody's supposed to be right.
But
really everybody's wrong.
Which is quite interesting because in order for somebody to tell you we don't live in a day and time of absolutes, isn't that an absolute statement?
Absolutely.
I think it is.
Absolutely.
And so it's a self-contradicting statement, which according to logic defeats itself. But that's where we live today in an illogical context. But here's where I'm going with this. As culture has continued to demonstrate America's desire for something like this, what you have are the right people in place now to speed up this train. I mean, there's a bigger issue here when it comes to the issue of culture because marijuana, from the standpoint of recreational use, and that's where we're dealing with it today, but also from the standpoint of relaxing on it, people can say all day long, well, it's because we learn more in science. And as we learn more in science, then of course we're going to apply that new knowledge to what we allow and what we don't allow. Well, there's a bigger picture here because it's marijuana today, but what will it be tomorrow? The bigger picture is America has a fascination with escaping, with dulling the senses, and it's all in the realm of fun. And my concern is that our children are being raised in an environment. Today, our children are young enough that it may not touch them. Teenagers, you're there because some of your friends are the ones that have either offered it to you already or they will offer it to you. And the reality is this, as America becomes more desensitized to the subject of marijuana and the legalization of marijuana, how do we talk to our children about it? Now, I want to go even beyond marijuana, because I told you tonight's show was not going to be the full length, so just be aware of that. Now, do you have any comments on that subject before I move on?
No, but I was just going to let you know you're down to like 8 minutes or so.
Well, we'll see what happens. The other issue that I want to talk about, though, it's in the same line, though, it's this. In America's draw towards mind-altering substances and things along those lines, it's a headline that comes from the U.S. News, and it actually was posted on November the 1st, here not too long ago, that it said, opioid epidemic taking toll on U.S. children and teens. Something I just saw not too long ago is that we have a problem where more young people, at a rate I believe it is of 200% more young people since the early 90s, are abusing over-the-counter pain pills or prescription strength pills. And this idea of the opioid epidemic and what it's doing is really scary in the sense of why are children doing it, what are they doing, and things along those lines. Here's a kind of a statement from this. Most painkiller poisonings were accidental among children under 10. Under 10. I'm not talking about 17, 18, 19-year-old kids that are out there doing this. Under 10.
That blows my mind.
It does mine too. What's interesting is that when you think about what is prescribed, there's a statement that is here that says enough opioids are prescribed every year to put a bottle of painkillers in every household. They're everywhere, and kids are getting into them. That's sad. It goes on to say that the CDC, the Center for Disease and Control, I believe it is, or Center for Disease.
Something like that.
It says that we have basically 78 daily overdoses on opioids. These are over-the-counter or prescription-strength painkillers. Now, here's the problem, and this is where we need to land tonight. Where we need to land is this. Our culture, our children, are in a culture that is more and more accepting to certain drugs. And the drug of choice that is on the ballots is marijuana. But the drug that is being utilized and the drug that is having serious effect in the sense of what is being sold at schools, what is being sold around the corner from children, even obviously as young as 10, they're overdosing on it, are these pain pills that mom and dad and grandma and grandpa have in their bins, in their medicine cabinets. And what concerns me is that there are going to be some parents who are listening to this tonight that probably have not even talked to their children about drugs, haven't talked to their children about what do you do when a drug is offered to you, how do you get out of it, because obviously your child is wanting to know how to get out of it in a way that is appropriate, and that may differ according to your child and the circumstance. But then also, what do you do once it has been offered to you? What concerns me is I would love to think that every parent who will ever listen to this particular episode has already talked to their children about this. And chances are, though, you and I both know that's not the case.
Well, and I think it comes down to as well, a lot of times when we think just say no, we're thinking like harder drugs. We're not thinking like prescription drugs or things like that, which is becoming so much more prevalent. I think a lot of times parents don't really think that, not purposely, that's maybe something that they need to discuss with them as far as like something that you would find in your medicine cabinet.
Oh, I agree. And you know, there are going to be some kids that are going to be, they're going to be attracted to this. They're going to be. And then there's going to be some kids that think, oh, that's just the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Right? And so you really have to know your child. Number one, I would say this, that where you and I start off as parents is know your child. Know what they light up to. Maybe if a commercial comes on TV or somebody comes across the news that's talking about a particular subject, observe how they respond and what they respond to. That's crucial for you to know your child.
Right, because just like you said earlier, the devil's not taking a break. The devil knows each individual temptation, and we're all so different.
Absolutely, and I would even say this to the teenagers who listen to this podcast. You know whether or not you're drawn to this. You just got to be real with yourself. Be real with yourself. Be brave enough to be real with yourself and to say, is this a subject that attracts me? Number two, I would say this, from a parent's point of view, you have got to know, and I know this is the old cliche, but you've got to know who your kid's hanging around. You've got to know that. For you to remain ignorant of who your children's friends are is not an excuse. For you to be so busy at work to not know who your kids' friends are, not an excuse. For you to be always sending your kid over to somebody else's house and never creating an atmosphere for those kids to come over to your house so that you can learn who those friends are, not an excuse. We've got to, as parents, understand that the Scripture does speak that the influence that other people will have not only in our life but the lives of our children, and if they bring a negative influence into our lives, then that influence will rub off. It's not as if we live in a bubble and we're not impacted by those who are around us. The reality is we are impacted by everybody who's around us, and we impact other people. The only question is, will it be a positive impact or a negative impact?
Right, and we have a comment from a listener, and I think this is really good. She says, self-control is a fruit of the Spirit, and using marijuana and other drugs takes away self-control. Of course, marijuana for recreational use is what we're talking about in this particular instance. She says it takes away that self-control, that fruit of the Spirit. She said, I see no spiritual benefit in using it. And then she also said that I would need to eat about 30 poppy seed muffins in one sitting to test positive on the test. So I'm good. I'm good.
Erin can keep eating opium and be good. Great. She can keep eating it. Now, if she ever starts drinking it, like, you know,
that's a whole nother story.
Juicing the seeds. I don't even know if you can do that.
But I really like that self-control because it also brings it back to the individual. Of course, as a parent, like you said, you need to know who they're hanging out with. You need to know all these things. But then putting it back on the individual that's faced with the temptation, okay, right there, you got the fruit of the Spirit to help you out right there.
Well, absolutely. And what we're talking about is obviously we want our children to grow into that. Right?
Oh, right.
And so for a 10-year-old who's overdosing,
I was going to say, for those 10
we've
got
to think not just when they're 18, 19. See, one of the, and I'm not reading that into that comment, but I will say this. One of the dangers that we as parents have is a belief that our children will never get involved with anything until they are older. And I would challenge that within you to say, if you wait until they are older before you start having these conversations, then you have waited, I won't say too late, but you have waited late in the game. And your child has already, chances are, now I've already prefaced this with, as homeschool family, and those of you who watch this, you typically know that Erin and I, we choose to homeschool our family, that it delays some of that exposure. But we also have to realize that our 13-year-old, that you know what, there will come a time that he will be exposed to it. And I want a relationship with him open to the fact that he can tell me that. But I've got to develop that at a young age. If I don't develop that at a young age, then I can't expect it to be there at 15, 16, 17.
Right, and delay is a key word because that doesn't mean he will never. That's it. And I think that's one thing that those who are that choose to homeschool or even send their children to a private school or areas where that might not come into the picture so soon, that we have to all realize delayed still means that it can happen, and it doesn't mean they're shielded forever. In really any situation that you're in, it could come about. And I guess I'm sitting here thinking, you know, I've always thought about the drug thing, speaking with the kids, even from our own personal standpoint. I've thought more like harder stuff that I don't know that my kids will be exposed to. But when you have medicine in your cabinet.
Well, and what's sad is, and maybe some of you who are, because I know that like Jonathan Zaporto has talked on this to an extent, and Jonathan is a school resource officer in the state of Georgia, and I know he and I have talked about it, but the reality is young people are bringing their pills. You know, instead of taking their pills, they're selling their pills. $20 pop. You know, and a person can get a pill, and it may even be less than that. So yeah, our kids are going to be exposed to things at a delayed rate for us, but other parents that are out there, you're looking at it going, well, are my kids already exposed to it? I don't know. But what I do know is this, that as our culture shifts, as parents, we've got to be proactive on this particular subject and not reactive. See, I believe that's a concept within parenting that God has called us to be, is to understand that this is a spiritual battle and that our children need us. You know, and I've used this before in my illustrations. in some of my lessons. Ephesians chapter 6 tells us to put on the full armor of God. Obviously, because we know that Satan is throwing fiery arrows at us. He's shooting fiery arrows at us. And so our shields can extinguish those fiery arrows. But that's written and understood to be individuals who are Christians. What about when our children are so young that they're developing their faith, they don't have their own shield? And that's where we as parents, we've got to put our shields over our children as well in this battle. We've got to be intentional about protecting our children from the fiery arrows of Satan. And if we're not intentional on this subject, my concern is that one day, one of those 78 overdoses might be one of your children. And I'm not interested in hearing that. That would break my heart. And it would yours too.
Well, that's why we have a listener who pretty much says the same thing you're saying. Says, parents, teach your children, even if your children know about drugs already, and they may not, it will be spiritually profitable for both of you to attack it head on. Open up about it. It may be uncomfortable, but it will be worth it.
Absolutely it will. So, and I want to encourage that from the parent standpoint, but obviously to the listener who wrote in on Facebook and brought up the fruit of the Spirit component for the personal side of this, I believe she's right. I think it's a she. I think you said she. I believe that that's a correct statement. And so what we've got to do then is instill personal responsibility within our children, not just for chores around the house. I believe that personal responsibility begins with some of those fundamental things. How do you teach personal responsibility to your 5-year-old? Well, you give him a task, and then you hold him accountable as to whether or not he accomplished that task or not. Personal responsibility for what you've been given. As he develops that concept of personal responsibility, then he has the idea of what it looks like when it comes to his own life. But if you don't develop personal responsibility, then how will they ever know that in their life? And maybe that's one of the problems where we are today. It's always somebody else's fault.
That's a whole nother conversation.
It can't be my fault. I can't take personal responsibility. But here's the reality. We want to, as parents, instill this within our children. So one of the suggestions that I would offer today is this. We've got to allow our children to understand that they are the ones that will say yes or no to that drug. That unless somebody physically holds them down and forces a pill in their throat, that nobody can make them do that. That even if it means they are isolated from friends, which I would suggest they need new friends if their friends are the ones that are dealing with these drugs. Even if they're isolated, even if they no longer get invited to the parties, even if they are no longer, the most popular kid in 3rd grade or 5th grade or 6th grade or 10th grade, the reality is this: we have got to drive home the personal responsibility for a yes and the personal responsibility for a no. Because the truth is, nobody that I'm aware of, now I'm sure there are some cases somewhere, but usually what it is an offer is made, and that child may not already have their mind made up on how they're going to answer that question, and they may waver in that moment, and they may be curious, and they may give in. But the personal responsibility goes on. Nobody can make you say yes. That's on you. You need to own that. So therefore, if you have the power to say yes, then you have the awesome power to say no. And that goes with any sin. It's not just this. You have the power to say no. Satan doesn't make you sin. That's not what the book of James teaches. We sin when we give in to the lust that we have, and that sin that we give into brings forth death. Now, I would also say this, that we need to help that young person process what do you do when somebody does offer it to you. Well, obviously, you need to understand that your response is to also protect other people. And so one of the ways you're going to protect other people is you're going to try to get that drug that is being dealt, and that would be called a drug dealer, even if they're your friend. You're going to get that drug dealer to be held accountable for what they're doing, because there's twofold. Number one, you want that drug dealer to go to heaven. I'm going to say that because oftentimes we say drug dealer, bad, lock him up. Well, what about this? That drug dealer has a soul, and Jesus died for his soul or her soul. So you owe it to them to speak truth into their life because their soul demands that you do that.
That is definitely a different but much better way to look at it.
You have to. So your child needs to see that as an opportunity to help somebody out eternally. But number two, it's this. What about everybody else that might buy those pills later on? Mm-hmm. You need to protect those people. And the way that you do that is by getting those pills off of the street or out of the school. And so you have got to go tell somebody. Because if you do see this and you don't go report it, then you're putting other people at risk. And that's a reality. And so what that is this. You know, we're talking about personal responsibility. Personal responsibility for the no. You got to say no. You have the choice to say no. Take personal responsibility for it. But number two, it's this. You've got to do what you can to help people eternally. And that means you get rid of these drugs because the drugs dull the senses. The drugs play with the self-control factor and oftentimes open ourselves up to other issues, much less 78 daily overdoses. I mean, that's too many. How many kids can overdose before we say it's too many? I mean, really. Is somebody out there going to say, well, we only had 78, we didn't have 100, so therefore that's good? No. You and I both know one is too many. And so this issue, it doesn't need to wait until we have, well, Joe, just 78 per day is not. No, one per day is too many. And so the way that we do that is trying to empower our children to have the fortitude and the backbone to stand even if nobody else stands. How do you do that? Well, you do that by showing them what that looks like in your own life, parent. Your kid is not going to all of a sudden just grow a backbone if you don't demonstrate what a backbone looks like. You've got to be willing to stand and take stances and say, no, that's wrong, and my family won't participate in that. If your child sees you doing that and then you debrief that and talk to them about the why, it's not to be done in an ugly fashion, but it is to be done with backbone. If you want your child to have a backbone, maybe you need to show them what that looks like. Do you have any comments?
From our listeners?
Yeah.
They've gotten kind of silent.
Well,
recently.
good. They're just listening then.
They are listening. They are taking it all in.
Oh, I was waiting on you.
No, I'm waiting on you.
Oh, you're waiting on me. Very good. So anyhow, those are just my 2 cents. Now, here's the deal. That really is just two things because there's so many other concepts that could be dealt with. But I will tell you this, and this is the way I'm going to leave it tonight. And if you want to chime in on Facebook, do so now because we're going to come to a close on the show. But the reality is this: we've got to be proactive on this subject. Speak now or forever hold your peace. That's right.
Or until next week.
Or until next week.
Not forever. Next week.
We've got to be proactive on this subject because I don't see culture going backwards. I don't. Now it could, but I don't believe that's where we're at. It's one of those things. Once the door is open, it's hard to shut the door again. And so as states will continue to consider marijuana in a legalized form, in one way, shape, or the other, what's going to happen is over the years, there will be more states that get on board, or there will be more states that get on board and move from medical usage to recreational usage. And that concerns me because we're raising children in a culture, wanting them to be heaven-focused and heaven-pointed, but we also have to be realistic to what Satan is doing around us. And so that's why I wanted to talk about this tonight, because when I heard that 24 states, including the District of Columbia, had some way, shape, or form legalized marijuana, that started talking to me because you're talking 50% of America almost. 50%. And folks, that's going to keep going. It's going to keep going until one day people are going to say, hey, wait a minute. Marijuana is just like alcohol. You remember when America in their past, they didn't let alcohol happen? Well, that's what marijuana is. And I know that because that's already being said. It's already being said. And so what I want to encourage tonight, number one, I want to encourage the teenagers. Please, if you are struggling with drug use, if you're struggling with alcohol use, please hear me. Satan is having a heyday in your life. He is so happy. He is so happy that you have decided to take that on as your recreation. He is so happy that you have opened that door to him. And you know what? He's going to take it further than you want it to go. You may say right now that it's safe, that you're handling it. And I'm going to tell you this. as soon as you think that you've got it all under control, that's when he's going to drop it on you. Please get help. Please stop. If you don't have a problem, then stop. Because that's not what you need to fill your life with. I also want to say this. If you know it's going on, you're not involved in it, you owe it to the person who's dealing and to everybody else who they're going to sell to. You owe it to them to tell somebody in authority so those drugs can get out of the school, get off the street. You owe that. To parents, I would simply say this. We've got to stop being afraid of handling tough issues with our children. And maybe we've got to stop being so naive thinking that our children will never deal with these issues. Our kids will. And I'll promise you this. A child whose parent is proactive on this subject will handle the actual event much better than the parent who never mentioned it to them. That's all I'm saying. Let's just resolve to tackle tough issues in a way that our children are prepared when Satan is going to throw this at them. That's what I'm saying tonight. So, you have any questions? You have any comments? Maybe you disagree. Now's your chance. Get in on Facebook. Now's your chance. And I'm taking it by Miss Hey Joe. There's not anybody wanting to jump at that.
Not according to my computer, but I wouldn't put a lot of trust in stock in my computer at the moment.
All right. Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say, however, after such a serious topic, I'm going to bring it a little lighthearted before we close out. Is that
good.
okay?
Please
bring
do
it a little
so.
lighthearted?
Please do so.
Okay, so I know we had the forever, never-ending pleated versus non-pleated pants survey going on, which, by the way, non-pleated won. Whoop, whoop.
No, it did not. There was no
Anyway,
calculation, no tallying.
Like I said, that went on way too long. So my point is, because it's time to move on to something else, I have a new survey for us.
Okay, good. I'm anxious to hear it.
Okay, so Christmas music before July or not before July? Because
that's a
Hey
no-brainer.
Joe over here,
That is a
Hey Joe over
no-brainer.
here starts listening to Christmas music in August, and if he's really feeling it, it's July.
Hey, you know
I'm
what?
just saying.
You know what the
a
best?
whole half year of music.
You know what the best thing about Halloween and Thanksgiving is? That it hurries for Christmas to get here.
Yeah. No.
And so,
hey, listen. Don't get me wrong. I love the holidays, all of them, and I love Christmas music. I just want to know what our listeners think about
Christmas before July, folks, or before August. I'm not sure what it is.
We got another pleated comment. Okay, we're past that. Girls won. Well, I say girls. Most of the women agreed with me. Not all, but most agreed. Non-pleated.
There was no tally.
Like I said,
so
we're past that one.
But the idea is this: we want to hear our new survey poll is Christmas music before August or July. I mean, we're splitting hairs on this one. It's still summer. Either way, obviously, I will go ahead and own it. I believe Christmas music is all year round. However, for the sake of keeping it special to the season, I try not to start listening to Christmas music until at least August. So, that being said, I want to see how many of you agree with me, and if you disagree with me, obviously, we're okay with you not tuning in.
No Christmas music before November.
All right, that's all we have tonight. We are out. Thank you for tuning in, and God bless. Thank you so much for tuning in to that episode of the Hey Joe Show. You know what's interesting to me is to think back in November of 2016 that one of the hot topics to discuss would have been the legalization of marijuana and the impact of the drug culture on teens at that time. Just as I was thinking about what was being said in there and thinking about where we are today, one of the sad statistics that I saw recently was that drug use, it's interesting that while many individuals who use drugs who are teenagers still do so by themselves, I think the statistic said that was 49%, which means almost 1 out of every 2, they don't want to be seen. It's not necessarily a recreational concept, at least in the sense of a peer recreation idea. But also, 1 out of every 3 drug users, which I thought this was quite interesting, used drugs with their friends over technology. And you and I think about the implications of always being connected and always being able to see one another. I guess in my mind, I would not have paused to consider the connection between drug use and technology, especially in this article, particularly was related to drug use amongst teenagers during the social distancing time of COVID-19. That you and I would think, well, if they can't be around their peers, and therefore they won't take it as much because the drugs, obviously it's a social thing, so therefore if they're not around their friends, if they're not around their peers, then they'll be less likely to take it. But parents, you and I have to understand something, that technology really doesn't take them away like it took you and I away. When you and I had school canceled or summer came about, there were some people that you didn't see all summer long. Well, in the day and age that we live, and you and I both know this, that technology keeps us continually connected. And drug use is also being studied from the standpoint of how does technology still allow that peer-to-peer influence when it comes to this issue. So anyhow, I hope you enjoyed that episode. It is interesting to me to look back at that. Obviously, I have changed. Erin stays the same. She's beautiful as always. The show has come a long way. We hope that you could see that as well. But it was interesting to see that some of the people who were commenting on that episode are the same people watching today. And for that, we want to say thank you. Thank you so much for making the Hey Joe Show a part of your family, a part of your personal spiritual growth for a number of years. And Lord willing, we're going to continue to do it as long as we're effective. So tonight, I'm going to sign off. I want to thank you for tuning in. Thank you again to the lightnetwork.tv, truth.fm. Check them out. Check us out at Kyle Publications on the internet. Check out our YouTube channel. And if you have not already subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do so. The Hey Joe Show. Check us out at all the social media places that you can think of. Chances are we're on them. Some of them we're not. But either way, check us out. We'll see you next week. Have a great week. God bless.
Please hang up and try again.